One of the benefits we're going to get from dips is, providing we ease into them and execute them properly, we can maintain this degree of shoulder mobility back here, which means we're always going to have ample shoulder mobility and range of motion to do our bench presses and our floor presses or whatever other movements that we care about driving up our performance in. What's up, guys? So today's video is going to be about two movements that I think don't get quite enough love in the strength training world, and that is dips and chin-ups. For most of us, these are going to be really good exercises to involve in our strength training because they're going to be less neurologically demanding, all else being equal, compared to heavier barbell lifts. Because there's no axial loading, which means that if we get good at these movements, we can actually tolerate quite a lot more volume on them than we can their equivalent barbell lift, and they even have some decompressive elements to them too. But then outside of that, as we'll see in these videos, these movements especially can teach us some really cool things about how we control and set our posture, but also how we use the shoulder joint and our upper back optimally in these movements is something that we can carry over then to our barbell lifts and get the benefits there. So hopefully by the end of this video, not only are you going to be better at performing your dips and chin-ups, but you're going to be doing them in a way that allows you to get better carryover to the other things that you're doing outside of these lifts. Enjoy. So let's look at dips first, because we all care more about pressing than pulling things, generally speaking. Right now, dips tend to get a bad rap due to the shoulder strain that's associated with them, but just like really any movement, that's going to be an issue if you're not ready for them, and a lot of the time it mainly comes down to technique. But there's a good reason to have dips in your program, and this is that it's going to maintain our ability to go through large ranges of shoulder extension, right? If we think about like keeping a balanced program to keep the shoulder functioning as we want, there are two main things that we want to be able to do generally in life that bench pressing kind of isn't going to help with. We want to be able to reach up for things, like we want to be able to reach the top shelf in the kitchen or whatever it might be. And we generally need to be able to reach behind us, even if it's just to put something in our back pocket, whatever it might be. Now, just if we talk to people who have done a lot of horizontal pressing over time and eliminate these movements, for example, go talk to Dave, we will see that we end up losing these ranges of motion up here if we don't do anything overhead. Makes sense. Similarly, we can end up losing this range of motion back here when we never go back here. So that's one of the benefits we're going to get from dips is, providing we ease into them and execute them properly, we can maintain this degree of shoulder mobility back here, which means we're always going to have ample shoulder mobility and range of motion to do our bench presses and our floor presses or whatever other movements that we care about driving up our performance in. Now, the other thing that this allows us to do is it basically mimics the recruitment of, say, an overhead or a high incline press. Obviously, we're pressing down in space. So we basically train the overhead pattern, at least in terms of muscular recruitment, by pressing down. So if you have a shoulder injury or some kind of reason why you can't achieve overhead mobility, or maybe you're working your way towards that, well, then these can actually allow you to train the same muscles in a very similar way without having to go into those ranges of motion. Now, the main reason that we see people, say, straining their shoulder or feeling very uncomfortable on dips is really just from the setup. If we look at most people doing a dip, they're in a very narrow and shrugged up position. Now, when we go into a dip and we need to get this backwards and upwards travel of the elbow, that shoulder blade and that shoulder needs to be able to rotate up. Otherwise, the arm can't go back in this path that we want it to. So if we're starting all shrugged up here and narrow and in, there's nowhere for that arm to go. What we need when we set up instead is for the neck to be as long as possible and actually for the shoulders to be wide, not retracted. Because as we'll talk about a little bit with pull-ups later, there's actually an advantage in these movements to being in a slightly protracted position, because that's going to allow the scapulars to glide nicely around the rib cage like we want. So when we're setting up here, what we'll normally see is someone will go to the top position and be all scrunched up and they'll have no neck up here. And then the problem is when they go down, they can't elevate the shoulders up any higher because the shoulders are already jammed up here. So instead, what we're looking for, and this is a drill actually that we do most of our training events to help people find their serratus. And why that's important is kind of outside the scope of this video, but just know that when you're doing your pressing movements, especially on things like dips, you should be able to feel it working and anchoring the shoulder joint in the position that we want. And doing a partial dip is a really easy way to get you used to what that feels like. So when we're here now, we're going to set up in like a partial dip, so like, you know, the top third or quarter, whatever it might be. And what we want to do in this position now is set the shoulders as wide as possible. So again, most people will be up here, shoulders will be up, the neck will be short. We want to go neck long and shoulders wide. And then from that position then, I'm going to have my shoulders very slightly protracted. So this would be retracted. I'm going to go slight protraction and wide. And then from that position, I'm going to lift myself off the floor just by pressing my shoulders down into my body. I'm not thinking about the bar at all, not thinking about my hands. I'm depressing the shoulder and keeping the neck long. So right now I've lifted myself off the floor, just like an inch or so, whatever it might be, just by doing that. The problem is when most people are setting up for these dips, they're pressing down super hard into the handles, and what they're actually doing is encouraging themselves to go up into elevation. If you think I'm pressing down here against an immovable object, well, that thing can't move. So the arm instead will move and go up here. And then we're already in a position where we're going to put the shoulder under loads of strain. Now, the other thing to note here is look which way the handles are facing. If you are doing them on angled handles, which is going to be best for most people, when we're doing dips, just like pretty much when we're doing any pressing movement, we want to focus on keeping the elbows tucked in. Okay, the reason for that is, unless you're a shoulder surgeon, very little good things happen out here. All the injuries, all the shoulder strain happens as we overflare and end up going out here. Takes away the chest, puts loads of excessive shoulder strain, so on and so forth. So when we're setting up with the handles facing this way, the handles are actively encouraging the elbows to stay in because the hands are angled like this. That makes it easier. Whereas if I was to face this way, now because the hands are angled out this way, they're actually, these now want to push my elbows out as opposed to in where I'm trying to keep them. Now there is going to be a few exceptions. People who have like shoulder injuries sometimes will feel better facing that way, but for the vast majority of you, if you're on angled handles, you want to be facing this way. So now when we add that in, we're going to be here. We're going to set the neck as long as we can. So pull your head up away from your body. We're going to go into a slight protraction. So again, that would be retraction. That would be kind of neutral. That would be protraction. Spread the collarbones wide as you can. And now from there, if we watch the elbows, they twist in as narrow as humanly possible. And now again, I'm going to press my shoulders down onto my armpit and try to feel for that serratus muscle, which is kind of on the front of your armpit there. And just hold that position. And you want to spend some time drilling this. And the reason for that is you need to get used to how you use the serratus to anchor the shoulder down onto the anterior rib cage, so that when we go through this movement now in the dip and the arm is having to come back like this, we're doing that without this excessive shrugging. Yes, there's going to be a little bit of elevation, a little bit of upward rotation here. That's good. We need that. But what we don't want is this, and then it continue to go up here. So you want to get to the point where you can just hang out in this position, long neck, shoulder collarbones wide, elbows twisted in, press down on serratus. You want to get to the position where you can just hang out here and there's not really any strain on any of the prime movers. Right now, all I can feel is basically my serratus. So it kind of feels like my armpit's going to cramp a little bit, but there's not really any effort going into that movement from my triceps or my front delts or anything like that, because most of that force coming down is from the shoulder pulling down into the body. Once you're familiar with that, then we can move on to how we can then execute the dip in its full range of motion. So now next, we're going to look at the posture that we want to maintain during the dip. Now we tend to see two extremes here when we're looking at the average person do a dip. We see the bolt upright position, kind of like, you know, when people squat for the first time and they're worried about face planting on the floor, so they stay super upright like this. The problem with that is then when we're super upright, we basically take a lot of the shoulder and the chest out of it, and then we basically put loads of it on elbow flexion, and we also end up going into a much higher degree of shoulder extension back here before we hit what we can arbitrarily call as depth, which just for the sake of this argument, we'll say is like shoulder joint level with the elbow, right? So if we're too upright, we end up having to go way further back up here and putting an excessive amount of the workload on the triceps. The other thing we see then is kind of like the dive bomb approach, where usually what we'll see is the legs will be kind of angled back behind the body. There'll be an excessive forward lean, and they'll just kind of swoop down into it. Now, if you're competing in calisthenics or whatever it might be, and like you have to move maximal weight on a dip to an arbitrary depth, that can kind of have its premise there and has its benefits. But for the average person who's looking to use them for hypertrophy or to carry over to extra movements, those really aren't going to be the way that we want to do. Instead, the goal posture here is basically going to be like a hollow rock, or if you haven't done hollow rocks, basically make your body into like a banana shape. So we've already discussed what we want to see going on at top. We've got that long neck, the wide collarbones, and the elbows rotated in towards the body. Now, I'm just going to go up and hold top position. What we want to see is this, give or take. So we've got the legs locked, toes are pointed up. There's a little bit of hip flexion. And as you can see at the top now, my chest is already kind of pointed down a little bit. Now, as I say, what we'll generally see is we'll see this will be too upright, and then people will try to stay too upright and all the weight will go back here into the elbow, and that'll be really stressful on the tricep. Or we'll see the legs back like this, and they'll just kind of swoop down like that and not get nearly enough core strength out of it, but also usually end up putting their shoulders in some pretty compromising positions. So the goal is to get into that small degree of hip flexion, treat it like a hollow rock exercise. And what I mean by that is we want to maintain that under tension. So like if you were to lay on the floor and go into a hollow rock, obviously your abdominals, your hip flexors and all that type of thing would have to hold you in that position against gravity. Here we want to do the same thing, because what we want to create is a movement where the shoulder and the arm is the only moving part. And we get to have the rest of that posture then is like a fixed segment, which just goes up and down in space, kind of like it's on a runner of sorts, okay? So how do we set that? So we're here, we can go neck long, collarbones wide, elbows in, leg goes out in front, leg goes out in front. So my tibialis is contracted, my quad is contracted, my hip flexors and my lower abs are contracted. All of that is working just to hold this top position here. And now, before we initiate the movement, this might be a little bit minutiae, but let's go for it anyway. I don't actually want to push down into the handle. I want to pull down, pull up on the handle. So this might be a little bit subtle to see, but this is me pushing down, resisting. This is me pulling into the handle. So that would be locking myself away. This would be pulling the handles up. So it's almost like, if you imagine that these were really poorly made and they kind of flex too much. When you're at the top of that dip, you're trying to pull the handles up towards the ceiling, and almost as if you were trying to get them to flex upwards. The reason we're doing that is, again, this is maybe out of the scope of this video, but in general, if we're holding ourselves in the top position, using what are going to be the prime movers on the concentric phase, coming up, we don't want to use those muscles on the way down because they're going to be tired. What we want to do is pass the load over to the antagonistic muscles to control the eccentric phase, which are basically all the muscles that are going to pull us down. So the goal, again, in that top position, you can practice it just holding at the top, is to get here, set the shoulders in the way that we've already discussed, get in your banana position, and then from there, pull. Have the slightest elbow bend, because it makes it way easier to achieve. But right now I'm pulling up on the handle. So right now there's not really any pressure in my pecs, my front delts and my triceps, and at least not that I'm actively creating. All of it is going like into my biceps, my back, my lats, and so on and so forth. And again, that's probably where a lot of the shoulder strain and issues with dips come from, is that we're starting off in that top position with those prime movers already under maximal tension. And then we're putting too much tension into them on the eccentric phase and using them to control the eccentric phase, going into what is quite a stretched position, as opposed to giving that load and that job role to the muscles that are meant to control the eccentric, allowing the pecs and front delts to lengthen under load and almost relax purposefully. So then they're in a position where they have all their resources, shall we say, to drive you up out of the bottom position. So what we want to see here, or should we say the best way to approach this in your mind's eye, whatever else you want to refer to it as, is, so again, long neck, wide collarbones, elbows in, pull on the handles. On the way down, allow your chest to point at the floor and actively lengthen your pecs, your front delts, and your triceps, almost like you're breathing tension out of them. Now, when I'm here in the bottom position, I'm not actively contracting any of those prime movers at all. And then to push out of the bottom position, what I want you to do is spread your scapula or spread your shoulder blades into the handle. So we relax the pecs and front delts on the way down, actively stretch, and on the way up, spread the shoulders into the handles. So what we're trying to maintain there is then, when we keep that rounded position very slightly in the upper back there, when I say round the shoulders into the handles, what we're encouraging is the scapulars to spread and rotate around the shoulder blade, which is exactly what's supposed to happen when we go through this type of pressing movement. On the way down, we relax the pecs and the front delts. We allow the scapulars and the shoulder blades to just travel back and closer together. And then instead of thinking about tightening all of this area up, because think we're all kind of ingrained, like when we do a bench press or whatever it might be, we're all very much ingrained that, as we go to that concentric phase, none of this can move. It has to be locked in. And I get that, that's fine. But we don't have to do that here. We also don't have to do that on push-ups, for example. That's one of the benefits of it. So instead of thinking about keeping all of this locked in place and having the arms extend without the scaps moving or with them minimally moving, which really from a shoulder health perspective is not optimal, well, let's take advantage of the freedom the scaps have here. And when they come back in together now, from here to initiate the movement, spread the scaps, spread the shoulder blades into the handles, allow the shoulder blades to spread and the shoulders to protract slightly like they would naturally in a pressing movement. And that's going to end up taking a lot of that front-sided shoulder strain out of it. So again, one last time. We're going to set up. So the neck is long, chin is tucked ideally, collarbones are wide, elbows are rotated in. And even on the way up, you're still trying to maintain that. Again, nothing good happens out here. So even as you press up, we're still trying to actively keep them in nice and close to the side. Pull up on the handle, give your body weight to the antagonistic muscles, actively lengthen the pecs and the front delts and the triceps. And then when you go to push up, spread your scapula out into the handles. So relax into it, spread your shoulder blades. Relax into it, spread your shoulder blades. Now, for a lot of people, when you start executing them like that, provided you have reasonable strength and shoulder mobility to start, they're going to feel way more comfortable, and it's going to be a much stronger position for you to build your front delt and your tricep strength, keep your shoulders healthier, maintain better range of motion. All these wonderful benefits on top of getting a reasonable amount of core work in there because you're holding that kind of hollow rock banana position throughout. Now, if you're having trouble with holding that position with the legs out in front, one thing you can do to make this really quite thoroughly unpleasant is to tie a band around you, an upright, whatever it is behind you, and then put that around your ankles. Because then obviously, as you can imagine then, if you're someone who's done a lot of dips with your legs back here and all that type of thing, it's going to be a hard habit for you to get rid of. The band goes around your ankles and then you have to actively pull forward against the band then. And obviously it's going to pull the whole time. So your abs and your hip flexors have to work really hard then to keep that banana position, which can be really helpful for ingraining that posture that we want to see obviously then when we take the band away. So now let's move on to chin-ups, because what we're going to see when we do the chin-up now is there's going to be a lot of parallels in terms of the posture and how we want to control the shoulders compared to what we see here on the dip. Let's move on to chin-ups next. Now I put this in the same bracket as dips purely because A, it's a body weight movement, so it kind of makes sense, right? B, they probably get underutilized by strength trainees in general. I mean, most strength trainees don't have a pulling movement that is trained like a strength lift. For me, there should be a chin-up variation or something like a pendlay row variation in there for all strength athletes who want their performance to be as good as it can be. And then thirdly, the reason it's in here with the dips now is a lot of the posture that we just touched on is going to be the same over here now. So again, when we see individuals doing chin-ups, we see generally like the same problems we saw in the lat pull down video. So Noah can probably like do some magic where he makes that kind of pop up somewhere, and you can watch that if you haven't, where we see a lot of extension bias and a lot of kind of the elbows being flared out, which not only takes away a lot of the core activation that we kind of want to work on or get a side benefit of from our chin-ups, but it also means that our lats kind of get removed from the movement to a reasonable degree. And again, we go more in depth on that in that lat pull down video. So again, here, what we want to see is we want to get out of that kind of flared extended posture, where again is where that kind of hollow rock posture is going to come in to help work against that. But then we also want to see that wider shoulder position again, because once we start going back into a lot of retraction here, almost inevitably we start seeing the sternum come up and us going back into that extension posture. But also, like we touched on with the dip there, when we're in this kind of very wide, neutral, or even slightly protracted position, the scapula can glide around the shoulders and the rib cage much more, and it actually allows us to get much better lat activation. So basically, you could make a very solid argument that you can't get full lat engagement in a fully retracted position for exactly that reason, because the scaps can't protract and come back and forth kind of as we want them to. So when we're setting up for the chin-ups now, we've decided to make my life really difficult. We're going to do them on the grenade grips here. Hopefully the demonstration is still going to kind of work. We want to see basically all the same things that we saw over there. So again, when people are setting up for chin-ups, if we were to like take a snapshot of them in the top position, we see this very scrunched up, narrow position again. Whereas what we would like to see in that top position, rather than being up here in elevation and lots of pressure up on the traps and the neck, we would like to see this wider spread collarbone position, just like we touched on the dips, okay? And a lot of the time, it's just kind of how you approach the lift that can help you get away from that. And then what we spoke about earlier, the other thing we want to see then is with the posture, the legs to be angled out in front, try to maintain that hollow rock position so we can keep all of this engaged. And that's also then going to stop us leaning back too far into the movement and basically turning this into more of an upper back or kind of like a pseudo row. And again, if you're someone who's like competing in CrossFit or calisthenics or whatever allows you to get the most weight up there or the most reps completely to whatever the arbitrary depth or height might be, it doesn't matter, that's fine. But if you're someone who's doing chin-ups to build musculature or have carryover to your other lifts, this is probably going to be a better way for you to execute them. Okay, so first off, let's look at the posture. So again, we don't want to be angled back. So if I go ahead now and cross my ankles and kind of put my legs behind me like we'd very commonly see here, what I'm going to have is a lot of chest extension or arched up, and then as I go up, I'm going to have a lot of lower back extension, and there's not really going to be anything going on through here. And because of all of this up here, the elbows are wider, where again, we're biasing that upper back, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but that isn't why most of us are doing chin-ups. Whereas instead, if I set up in the same position now and I just bring the feet out in front, so I say the tibialis is contracted, the quad is contracted, feet are angled up in front, and now I try to keep them just angled slightly in front of me as I go through that same movement. Now I get a bit of a narrower elbow position, more down here, and the feet stay in front of the body, and it allows me to do, if you imagine, that would be almost considerably more like a lat pull down as opposed to like a face pull or a wide grip row. So again, in the top position, so you can see from the side, difference is going to be, this is like with extension and a lot of weight behind the body. So like there. Whereas we do the banana shape, as all of my clients are incredibly tired of hearing about by now. We're here and feet out in front. Okay, so that's the first thing. And yes, it's going to humble you a little bit, but that's okay. The next part is how you initiate the movement now. So again, just like on the dips, a lot of the problem with chin-ups arise from us being in this horrible shrugged up position, right? So this time now, when we're going to pull up, the only thing I would like you to think about would be to, instead of thinking pull yourself towards it, in the bottom position, you're naturally shrugged up to start, right? Your neck is already kind of shortened, your shoulders are pulled in because your arms are up above. What we want to see in the bottom position is this. So the shoulders come down and wide and the neck get longer. So if the goal in terms of shoulder posture in what would be the top position is to have the longest neck, the widest shoulders possible, then all I want you to think about on the way up is actively lengthen your neck and widen your shoulders. Don't think about anything else. So the goal is to pull all of this down and wider, and that's how you get to the top. And I know it sounds dumb. I know he's like, how does that move me? I get it, but try it. And instead then what we're gonna see is when we get to that top position, we're gonna be in a much wider, more natural, neutral position at the top, which quite frankly is gonna be stronger and much nicer on our shoulders. So we're here, notice how the elbows twist in, narrow, because that's where the lats are gonna do their work. Pull the head up, and then from there, lengthen the neck, widen the shoulders. So now we're in this position, as opposed to up here, where a lot of people will be. We wanna be lower down. And that's gonna make it way more effective at recruiting your lats and keep your shoulders way healthier. And again, just like we mentioned earlier, if you wanna be really cruel to yourself, you can attach a band behind you and again, have it around your feet. That will actively pull your feet back. So you have to work really hard on that hollow rock position to maintain it. Don't do that if you're using these, because obviously these move as well. Then you end up swinging around like a monkey everywhere. Trust me, I've tried it. It's not worth the trade-off. But if you're on like a regular pair of pull-up handles or whatever it might be, that can work really well to help ingrain that. So hopefully now you've got a better grasp on how to execute your dips and your chin-ups to have better carryover to the rest of your lifts, get you more hypertrophy, but most of all, just get less beat up by them and have them feel better. So we hope that was useful. As always, thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting the YouTube channel, and we'll see you next time.